Hi, my name is Naveen. In this video, we will see about namespaces in Kubernetes. In Kubernetes, there are different kinds of objects and most of them belong to a namespace. Not all of them, most of them belong to a namespace. The namespaces help us in grouping the objects in a cluster. Let's assume we have three teams: dev, testing and prod. And for each team we can create a namespace. Under these namespaces we can allocate some resources. And whatever resources we allocate under the dev team, they cannot access the rest of resources of the other two teams and vice versa. Now this helps in organizing the respective objects without interfering with the other two. In this video we will see what is a default namespace and how to create a new namespace, and also how to include the namespace attribute using the run command and through the YAML file, and then changing the namespace details in the config file. And finally we will see how resource quota will help us with the namespace, how they work with each other. For this video I am using the Google Cloud as my cloud provider. I have created one master node and two worker nodes, and all the documentation regarding the namespaces can be found in the kubernetes.io website. Now let's begin. I'm in my master node now, and the command to see all the namespaces in the cluster is kubectl get namespaces. And there is a shortcut command for this one. And I have made the kubectl as an alias with the letter K. So this is the command by which we can get all the namespace details in the cluster. Now let's create a pod using the run command. The pod has been created, but we didn't mention any namespace details in the YAML file. Now let's go and see under which namespace this pod has been created, because we didn't give the namespace details anywhere, even in the run command or in the manifest file. We can see the pod details using the describe command, k described followed by the object type and the pod name. Here we can see the namespace is default. If you create any object in the cluster without providing the namespace, then the default one will be the default namespace. Now before adding namespace details into the pod YAML file, we need to create a namespace. And the command to create a namespace is k create namespace followed by the namespace name. And to check all the namespace details, we use the same command k get ns. Now we can see dev and testing has been created. Now let's create a pod under each namespace, dev and testing. Now if we check for the pods, we can see only the test one pod, but we don't see the dev pod and the testing pod. To see those pods, we have to give a specific attribute at the end of this command, and it's -n followed by the namespace name. Now I can see the pod running and the dev namespace, and same if I give testing, I can see the pod running under testing namespace. Now if I go and check the pod dev underscore pod, I will get an error, and even to use the describe command we should give the dev namespace at the end. We can see here the namespace as dev. Now let's create a pod using the YAML file. This is the default YAML file created using the run command, and in this YAML file, to include the namespace details, it has to be under the metadata. Save the file and create the pod. The pod has been created, and it doesn't show under the default namespace. So these are the two ways by which we can include the namespace details in a pod, either through the run command or using the YAML file. And to see all the pods under all the namespaces at a time, the command is kget pod followed by all namespaces. We can see here the pods under default namespace, dev namespace, cube_system namespace, and the testing one. If you are under the dev team, every time when you want to see any object details under your namespace, we have to give the option -n is equal to dev. And if you don't give these details, then the command kubectl will automatically check under the default namespace. We can change this by using the kubectl config set context command. For this, initially we need to know the username of the current context. kubectl-admin@kubernetes is the name of the current user for this cluster, and using this username details we can change the default one. For this, the command is kubectl config set context and the username followed by the namespace details. Context has been modified. Now if you give the command kubectl get pods, it will check under the dev namespace, not the default one. All these details can be found under the config file, which we have copied during the installation process. In the config file we can see the details. This is the cluster details, and under the contexts the cluster name is Kubernetes, namespace is dev, and the user is Kubernetes-admin. I will change the name here. And now if you check for the pods, it is checking under the default namespace. Changing the namespace will be a frequent task we do in the Kubernetes exam, so we need to be familiar with it. Next, we will check the quotas. Quotas is a separate section which I will cover in the next video. As of now, we can create n number of pods in this cluster as per the limitations of the nodes. But in a definite namespace, either dev or testing, we can limit the number of pods created, and each pod also we can limit the CPU and the memory usage. For this, we use the quotas. Now we have created a quota. We can see here the resource quota which I created is not in the default namespace, it is under the dev namespace. And if I check the quota details, we can see there are 2 out of 5 pods. So I have the limitation of creating only 5 pods under this namespace. If you have any more doubts about the namespaces, you can mention it in the comment section and I will try to answer them. And if you like this video, please subscribe to my channel, me Aliu. Thank you and see you in the next one.